The White House is announcing a new rule for healthcare plans to improve access to mental health care. The changes are being to ensure that mental health care treatments are covered on plans at the same level as other kinds of health care. The changes will require healthcare plans to conduct analysis of the networks, close loopholes, and clarifies what they can and cannot do. Officials say that the changes come at a time when there is an enormous need for more mental health services.
We are really experiencing a mental health crisis. 2 in 5 adults report symptoms of anxiety or depression. Across the country, kids are really struggling in many ways with mental health needs. And so it was imperative that we close those gaps, that we enforce the law on the books and ensure that health insurance companies are taking the steps they need to make mental health services really accessible for people.
Administration officials say that the change will impact 175 million Americans with private insurance. Well, politicians down under, they are looking to ban young children from using social media. Australia will become one of the first countries in the world to impose age restrictions for platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Tina Kraus has our story.
Australia's Prime Minister says there's nothing social about social media, and his government plans to set a minimum age for teenagers to use it.
I want to see kids off their devices and onto the footy fields and the swimming pools and the tennis courts. We want them to have real experiences with real people, because we know that social media is causing social harm.
Australia will draw the line somewhere between 14 and 16 years old to prevent anyone younger from using social media platforms without their parents' permission.
You can see some crazy things that kids should not see on those platforms, so I think that's good.
But some experts warn the law could backfire, preventing younger kids from finding the support they need, or driving them to use social media secretly, increasing the danger.
This is a global issue that governments around the globe are trying to deal with.
More than a dozen U.S. states are pushing for legislation to protect children from online harm, including bullying. Utah requires minors under 18 to get parental consent before using platforms such as TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook. Australia hopes to become one of the first countries in the world to set age limits after an initial trial of age verification technology. But questions remain about whether a ban will be enforceable or effective. Tina Kraus, CBS News, London.
Now, in a sign of escalating concern over social media's impact, the U.S. Surgeon General recently called for putting tobacco-style warning labels on social media to warn users that the platform can harm children's mental health. Well, coming up on your news at 4, a Minnesota motorist is hospitalized, but lucky to be alive after they were pulled from a burning vehicle. We'll share the story next.